It's July 1518, and a woman named Frau Trofea walks out of her half-timbered house, steps onto the rough, sun-baked cobblestones of a narrow street in Strasbourg, and she just begins to dance.
Just right there in the street.
Right there. There's no music playing. There's no festival going on. There is absolutely no rational reason for this to be happening. It is just silent, ceaseless, frantic movement.
Which is such a striking image.
It really is. And she dances through the morning. She dances through the blazing heat of the afternoon, and she will not stop until her feet are quite literally bleeding, leaving a trail of crimson footprints on the stones.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are taking a massive stack of municipal records, physician chronicles, and modern psychological analyses to unpack a 500-year-old mystery for you.
And it is a fascinating one.
It really is. And I have to warn you right up front, we are not tracking a war today. We aren't tracking a plague of fleas or some waterborne illness. We are investigating a plague of movement.
Yeah, and this is arguably one of the most unsettling historical investigations we can undertake. I mean, we have the city council minutes, we have the tax records, we have the handwritten sermons of the cathedral priests, so we know this happened.
Right, the paper trail is all there.
Exactly. But exploring this phenomenon, it challenges our fundamental understanding of human biology. We are stepping into an event that blurs the line between history, neurology, and, well, folklore, to uncover a deeply disturbing reality about what the human mind is capable of doing to the physical body.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because going from a quiet summer morning to a citywide catastrophe based entirely on a woman dancing, it sounds like a fairy tale, not history.
It really does sound made up.
Right. But to even begin to understand how this physical mechanism is triggered, we really need to look at the tinderbox that this spark fell into. I've been reading through the socioeconomic context of Strasbourg in 1518, and honestly, to call it a difficult time feels like a gross injustice.
Oh, absolutely. That's a massive understatement.
Yeah. Because this was a city in the Holy Roman Empire, right on the Rhine, with a population of around, 25,000?
Roughly 25,000, yeah.
And while it was theoretically this major commercial hub, the reality on the ground was a city stretched so far beyond its breaking point that the social fabric was basically disintegrating.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to understand the sheer, crushing psychological weight of the environment these 25,000 people were trapped in.
Right.
We're looking at a population enduring compounding generational trauma.
Right.
The weather in the preceding years have been catastrophic. We are talking about brutal freezing winters followed by summers of drought and localized flooding.
Just back-to-back disasters.
Exactly. Harvest after harvest had failed. And in a 16th century agrarian economy, when the wheat and rye harvests fail, bread prices don't just go up. Bread ceases to exist for the lower classes.
Yeah, and the historical record showed that the price of grain in the region spiked to levels that were just insurmountable. So you have widespread, severe famine. People were eating roots, they were foraging in the forests, and literally starving to death in the alleyways of the city.
Which is horrific on its own.
Right, but it wasn't just the starvation. Because the human immune system, when it's deprived of basic caloric and nutritional intake, it collapses.
Totally shuts down.
Yeah. So disease was just tearing through this weakened population. You have smallpox, which was a constant terror back then. You have leprosy. And then you have syphilis, which was a relatively new disease in Europe at the time.
And that's a crucial detail right there. Because syphilis in the early 16th century, the Great Pox, as it was sometimes called, was vastly more virulent and acute than the strains we know today.
Like, it moved much faster.
Much faster, and it caused horrific, highly visible physical degradation. We're talking disfiguring pustules, severe bone pain, and flesh literally rotting away.
Oh, man. That is brutal.
It was. So everywhere you looked in Strasbourg, you saw visible reminders of gruesome mortality. And hanging over all of this, casting a shadow over every single cough or rat in the street, was the ever-present lingering dread of the bubonic plague returning.
Because the Black Death was still a living nightmare in the cultural memory of Europe.
Exactly. They all knew the stories.
So when you look at those conditions, I naturally start to think about how human biology handles stress. If you or I have a bad week at work, our bodies manifest it, right?
Oh, for sure.
We get tension headaches, our shoulders knot up, maybe we get a stress rash or insomnia. Cortisol just floods the system.
Right, or fight or flight response.
Exactly. But the citizens of Strasbourg were living in a state of terminal, inescapable dread. Your fight or flight response is pegged at maximum all day, every day. You wake up, there's no food. You walk outside, your neighbor is dying of an unrecognizable disfiguring disease. You're just waiting for the end.
What's fascinating here is how fear operates on a mass scale over prolonged periods. The baseline reality of an entire city becomes fundamentally altered.
Right.
Their cognitive landscape shifts. They are existing in a state of hyperarousal. The nervous system is frayed to the point of structural failure. When an entire community expects death daily, the psychological architecture holding society together becomes incredibly brittle.
It sounds like a pressure cooker where the release valve has been welded shut. You have 25,000 people trapped in this atmospheric dread. Something had to explode, but nobody expected the explosion to look like a dance.
No, absolutely no one could have predicted that.
And all that pressure was pooling in the streets, just waiting for an outlet. Which brings us right back to our patient zero, Frau Trofea, on that hot July morning.
Right.
She steps outside and begins this silent, frantic dance. Her husband comes out and, pleads with her to stop, but she doesn't answer him. The accounts say she just keeps moving. And I tried to imagine the biomechanics of this. We aren't talking about a light waltz in a ballroom here.
No, not at all.
We are talking about erratic, forceful, relentless movement on rough stone.
The physical toll would be immediate and catastrophic.
Yeah.
I mean, human anatomy is not designed for continuous high-impact movement without recovery.
Especially not on cobblestones.
Exactly. Within hours, the cartilage in the knees and hips would begin to grind.
Yeah.
The small metatarsal bones of the feet slamming repeatedly against 16th century cobblestone without modern footwear, they would sustain microfractures.
Nope.
Yeah. And the muscles would begin to consume their own limited glycogen stores rapidly,
Right.
which floods the bloodstream with lactic acid, causing severe full-body cramping.
And yet, she dances through the morning, through the blazing heat of the afternoon, and into the evening until she finally collapses. But, what I found truly horrifying in the Chronicles isn't the collapse itself.
It's a waking up.
Yes, it's what happens next. After a brief period of unconsciousness, her eyes open, she drags herself back up onto her ruined feet, and she resumes dancing. Seeing your neighbor do this for 10 minutes is eccentric. Watching her do it for 12 hours, collapsing and getting right back up, that shifts from a curiosity to a profound violation of the body's survival instincts.
It is a terrifying display of restraint, in a way.
How so?
Well, we're conditioned by modern cinema to expect theatrical, supernatural elements, demonic voices, levitation, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the pure, unadulterated eeriness of the Strasbourg event comes from its mundane reality.
Yeah.
It is a woman in regular clothes, on a regular street, completely unable to command her own nervous system to stop.
And the pain must have been agonizing. Her feet swell up, the skin splits, the blisters burst and bleed, but the impulse to move completely overrides the biological imperative to stop feeling pain.
Which defies logic.
It completely does. And as she danced for days, the contagion began to spread. Because within a week of Frau Trofea stepping out of her door, the municipal records note that roughly 30 of her neighbors had joined her.
30 people. This is where the municipal authorities are forced to step in. Because a single person is a tragedy, but 30 people bleeding and dancing silently in the street is a public crisis.
Yeah, that's a riot, basically.
Right. It disrupts the market, it causes localized panic, and it threatens the precarious order of a city that's already on the brink of collapse. But it is the intervention of the city council that catapults this from a localized, bizarre event into one of the most infamous medical disasters in history.
I really want to spend some time on this intervention because it blew my mind. We fast forward just a bit. Within a month, that group of 30 has swelled. We are now looking at as many as 400 men, women, and children caught in this bleeding, agonizing, ceaseless dance.
400 people.
400. The city authorities are panicking. So they consult the leading physicians of the time. The physicians observe these 400 exhausted people, and they officially diagnose them with a condition called hot blood.
Which raises an important question. How did medieval science arrive at such a diagnosis?
Right.
We have to understand Galenic medicine. To a 16th century physician, human health was governed by the four humors.
Okay, the humors. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile.
Exactly. And these humors were tied to the four elements: air, water, fire, and earth. Health was entirely a matter of equilibrium. Illness was never viewed as a localized infection. It was a systemic imbalance of these fluids.
Right, so if you had a fever, you had too much blood, which is hot and wet. If you were depressed, you had too much black bile.
Spot on.
So when the Strasbourg physicians look at a mob of people who are flushed, sweating, and moving frantically, they diagnose an excess of hot blood. They literally believe the blood had overheated to the point that it was essentially boiling the brain, causing this manic physical agitation.
That is exactly the logic of the era. And the cornerstone of humoral medicine was purging. If you have an excess of a humor, you must evacuate it from the body.
Like using leeches.
Yes. You bleed the patient, you induce vomiting, or you induce sweating. But for hot blood manifesting as manic movement, the prescribed treatment was that the hot blood had to be danced out.
Danced out.
Yes. The body had to be forced to continue moving until the overheated humor was entirely burned off and equilibrium was restored.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the city council actually follows this advice to the letter. They don't quarantine these people. They don't try to restrain them. The government actively funds and encourages the contagion.
It's staggering to think about.
It is. I was reading about the logistics of this. They cleared out the guild halls and the grain markets. They constructed massive wooden stages in the public squares. And they spent municipal funds to hire dozens of professional musicians, pipers, and drummers to play upbeat music in shifts just to keep the afflicted moving.
It seems maliciously absurd to the modern observer. But to the 16th century mind, this was cutting-edge public health policy. They were trusting the science of their day.
But the underlying philosophy is so flawed. The analogy that comes to mind isn't just throwing fuel on a fire. It's more like a broken thermostat that reads the temperature backward.
How do you mean?
Well, it's like the room is freezing, so the thermostat thinks, oh, I must blast the air conditioning to fix this. The doctors saw exhaustion, so they prescribed infinite exhaustion.
That's a perfect analogy.
And just think about the sensory dissonance of that scene. You are standing in the central square of Strasbourg. You are surrounded by 400 people whose organs are failing. They are crying out in pain. They are bleeding through their leather shoes. They are collapsing and being dragged back to their feet by hired strongmen.
Right.
And all around this scene of absolute human misery, you have the bright, festive, upbeat music of hired pipers playing a jig.
It is a dystopian, grotesque tableau.
Yeah.
And the physical toll of this prescription was devastating. When you force a severely malnourished, dehydrated human body into perpetual cardiovascular output, the biological systems cascade into failure.
Yeah, they just break down.
Exactly. Dehydration leads to a drop in blood volume, which forces the heart to pump at a lethal rate just to maintain blood pressure. The sufferers began experiencing massive ischemic strokes. They were having fatal myocardial infarctions, heart attacks, right there on the wooden stages.
The records from the time are debated by historians regarding the exact death toll, but some contemporary chroniclers claim that at its peak, up to 15 people were dying every single day.
15 a day.
15 people a day dropping dead from cardiac arrest while the band plays on.
And this soaring mortality rate is what finally shatters the illusion of the medical consensus. Because when your cure results in a mass casualty event, and the music clearly isn't restoring humoral balance, desperate authorities always look for a different paradigm.
They realized the doctors were wrong.
The city council realizes the physicians were spectacularly wrong. This isn't an issue of hot blood.
So the terrified city officials abruptly reverse course, and I find this pivot fascinating. They abandon the realm of science and medicine entirely, and they pivot back to the spiritual. They conclude that this isn't a disease of the physical body, it is a profound curse on the soul. So they dismantle the stages, they dismiss the musicians, they take the surviving sufferers, including Frau Trofea, they load them into carts, and they transport them out of the city.
To Severn.
Right, they take them to a mountaintop shrine dedicated to St. Vitus, located in a town called Severn, in order to be absolved.
If we look closely at this decision, the choice of St. Vitus is highly specific and revealing.
Yeah, why him?
Well, St. Vitus was a Christian martyr from Sicily, dating back to the Diocletianic persecution around the year 303. But over the centuries, as Christianity blended with local pagan traditions in Central Europe, a very specific mythology grew around him. He became the patron saint of dancers, actors, and entertainers.
Okay.
But crucially, the folklore contained a dark caveat. If you angered St. Vitus, he would curse you with compulsive, agonizing dancing.
Oh, wow. So we aren't looking at the curse as a supernatural reality, but as a cultural diagnosis.
Precise.
The authorities looked at the symptoms, remembered the folklore of St. Vitus, and concluded they had incurred divine wrath. They believed that engaging in a specific religious ritual at his shrine, which apparently involved putting the dancers in special red shoes and walking them around an altar, was the only way to lift the curse.
And what makes this historical narrative so compelling is the outcome. According to the chronicles, following this arduous pilgrimage to the shrine in Severn, the outbreak actually begins to fade.
It actually worked.
By late summer, the dancing stops. The surviving people finally break the trance and fall into exhausted sleep.
I was really trying to deconstruct exactly why that worked. Obviously, we don't believe a saint from the 4th century magically lifted a hex. Was it just the physical removal from the chaotic, noise-polluted city environment? Or was it just that their bodies were so far past the point of cellular exhaustion that their nervous systems literally shut down?
It is a confluence of factors, really. Physically removing them from the stages, the relentless drumbeats and the localized panic of Strasbourg would have immediately lowered their physiological arousal.
Right, getting them out of the pressure cooker.
Yes. But the psychological component, the placebo effect of religious absolution, is paramount here. If your entire worldview is structured around the reality of saints and curses, and you truly believe you are cursed, your mind creates the physical compulsion.
Okay.
Consequently, if you truly believe a priest at a holy shrine has just absolved you, your mind gives the nervous system permission to release its grip on the compulsion.
That makes a lot of sense. So the dancing stops, the city buries its dead, sweeps the stages away, and tries to rebuild. But what actually caused it? It wasn't hot blood. We know that. For 500 years, historians, toxicologists, and psychologists have been trying to solve this.
It's a very crowded lineup of suspects.
It is. I want to run through the most prominent theories with you, starting with the one that feels the most chemically plausible. Because when you mention a medieval town, famine, and crazy behavior, the immediate suspect is poison. Specifically, ergot poisoning.
Ah, ergotism.
Yeah.
It is a very famous historical culprit. It has been proposed as the underlying cause for numerous historical anomalies, most notably the Salem witch trial hysteria.
Right. So for those who don't know, ergot is a fungus claviceps purpurea that grows on damp rye grain. And during a famine, when the weather has been terrible and the rye is rotting, peasants can't afford to throw away bad grain.
No, they would starve.
Exactly. So they bake it into bread. And ergot contains alkaloids that are chemically related to lysergic acid, diethylamide, or LSD. So a town eating LSD-laced bread and hallucinating for weeks sounds like a slam dunk theory, doesn't it?
It seems like the perfect scientific key to unlock the mystery. They inject the psychoactive fungus, they hallucinate, they lose control of their motor functions, and they begin to dance.
Makes total sense.
However, when modern toxicologists and medical historians scrutinize the pathology of ergotism against the detailed eyewitness accounts from Strasbourg, the theory completely collapses.
Why is that? Because if they are hallucinating on bad rye, wouldn't erratic movement be a natural byproduct?
You would think so, but it comes down to the precise physiological mechanisms of ergotism. Ergot alkaloids do cause hallucinations, but they also cause severe agonizing vasoconstriction.
Meaning they restrict blood flow.
Exactly. They cause the blood vessels in the extremities to clamp down so tightly that blood flow to the hands and feet is entirely cut off. This leads to a horrific condition known historically as St. Anthony's fire.
Because of the burning sensation in the limbs.
Precisely. The limbs experience an agonizing burning sensation, followed by violent involuntary muscle spasms and seizures. And then, because the tissue is starved of oxygen, severe gangrene sets in.
Oh, God.
The limbs turn black, mummify, and literally fall off the body.
Wow. Okay, so that paints a very different picture.
A profoundly different picture. Ergotism does not produce coordinated, rhythmic, days-long dancing. A person suffering from severe ergot poisoning would be writhing on the ground in excruciating agony. They would be physically incapable of bearing weight on their gangrenous feet, let alone engaging in sustained, upright, rhythmic cardiovascular activity for a week.
Right, you can't dance if your feet are turning black and falling off.
The biomechanical reality of ergot poisoning simply does not fit the highly specific symptoms described in the Strasbourg Chronicles.
That makes total sense. So we throw out the toxic bread theory. We know the physiological evidence contradicts it. That brings us to the prevailing belief of the citizens themselves, the curse of St. Vitus. Now, earlier I mentioned that the belief in the curse acted as a cultural diagnosis. I want to push on that, because the myth of St. Vitus isn't just background noise here. It is the architectural blueprint for the disease.
That is an incredibly sharp way to frame it. The concept of St. Vitus's dance was a known, established narrative in the Rhine Valley. The mythology had existed in the region for over a century. Because that myth was embedded in their religion and their folklore, the script for this specific type of affliction was already preloaded into the cultural consciousness of every single citizen in Strasbourg. They knew exactly what being cursed by God or a saint was supposed to look like.
It reminds me of a computer virus that is sitting completely dormant on a hard drive. The malicious code is already written. It's already installed deep in the operating system of their minds through childhood stories, sermons, and cultural osmosis.
That's a great way to put it.
It is just sitting there, totally inactive, waiting for the user to experience a system overload and click the wrong link to execute the program.
That analogy perfectly captures the mechanism of cultural contagion. Ergot wasn't the trigger, and an actual 4th century saint wasn't the trigger. The trigger was the psychological collapse of a population, which then executed the dormant cultural script.
So who clicked the link? What activated that script in Frau Trofea? That brings us to the leading modern explanation, meticulously argued by medical historian John Waller. We are looking at a phenomenon known as mass psychogenic illness.
Yes, mass psychogenic illness, sometimes historically referred to as mass hysteria, is a phenomenon where psychological distress manifests as a set of physical symptoms that spread rapidly through a cohesive group. What's fascinating here is that mass psychogenic illness operates like a highly specific psychological recipe. It requires 3 distinct ingredients to occur.
Let's break those down.
First, you need an enclosed community that is completely crushed by extreme, inescapable psychological stress.
Like we talked about.
Exactly. As we established, Strasbourg was a pressure cooker of famine, syphilis, and the terror of the plague. Their collective nervous system was fundamentally compromised.
Right, so ingredient 1 is maximum sustained environmental trauma.
Ingredient 2 is a shared cultural belief system, a common language of distress. For the citizens of Strasbourg, that language was the deep-seated fear of the St. Vitus curse.
Okay.
And ingredient 3 is a population of highly suggestible individuals who, under the weight of this crushing pressure, experience a psychological fracture and slip into a dissociative trance state.
So, Frau Trofea was simply the release valve that finally blew. The compounding pressure of the starvation, the disease, the misery, it was just too much for her conscious mind to process.
It was a system overload.
Yeah. When the human mind can no longer endure reality, it fractures. But that profound internal distress has to take a physical shape. It has to go somewhere. And because she grew up hearing the terrifying folklore of St. Vitus, her subconscious mind reached for that specific, preloaded script to express her psychological agony.
Precisely. In modern psychiatric terms, we are discussing a severe form of conversion disorder on a mass scale.
Conversion disorder.
Yes. It's a condition where psychological trauma is literally converted into physical neurological symptoms, like paralysis, blindness, or in this case, compulsive movement, without any underlying organic disease. Her psychological agony bypassed her conscious will and hijacked her motor cortex.
And once she started, the contagion didn't spread via a germ or a contaminated water supply. It spread by sight. It spread person to person, observation to observation, like a rogue idea catching fire.
Just from watching her.
Right. When her neighbors, who were under the exact same immense environmental stress and who shared the exact same cultural folklore, watched her dancing, their minds unconsciously recognized the script. Their own psychological defenses collapsed, and they fell into the exact same dissociative trance.
It is the ultimate manifestation of empathy and shared trauma. They mirrored her breakdown.
But here's the mechanism I really need to understand. I can understand a psychological twitch. I can understand fainting. But to dance until your feet are raw meat? To dance until you have a massive heart attack on a wooden stage?
It seems impossible.
It does. How does the mind physically override the body's most primal survival instincts? Because if I touch a hot stove, my nervous system pulls my hand back before my conscious brain even registers the burn. How does the brain ignore a week of shattered bones and failing organs?
The neurological mechanism behind this is perhaps the most profound and unsettling insight of this entire historical event. During severe dissociative states and conversion disorder, the brain has the capacity to fundamentally alter nociception. Yes, the sensory nervous system's response to harmful stimuli.
So it's literally blocking the pain signals from reaching the conscious part of the brain?
Exactly. The subconscious mind, locked in this compulsive, culturally dictated loop, triggers the release of massive amounts of endogenous opioids, endorphins, and adrenaline. Simultaneously, neurological pathways in areas like the periaqueductal gray can actively inhibit pain signals ascending the spinal cord.
Wow.
The brain effectively severs the communication between the traumatized tissue of the feet and the prefrontal cortex. Frau Trofea did not want to dance. Her neighbors did not want to dance.
They were completely trapped.
They were prisoners in their own bodies, locked in a dissociative fugue state where the subconscious mind exerted a tyrannical control over the central nervous system, turning off fatigue and pain warnings entirely.
It is genuinely terrifying to think that under the right pressure, your own mind could hijack your body, ignore fatal damage, and force you to perform a cultural script until your heart gives out.
It is terrifying.
But to prove that this isn't just a bizarre, one-off medieval glitch, some random anomaly confined to one city in 1518, we need to look at the broader historical pattern, because the Dancing Plague of Strasbourg wasn't the first time this happened.
Not at all. The 1518 event is simply the most thoroughly documented case. But historians have tracked more than 10 similar dancing manias that broke out in communities along the Rhine River. And if we look at the timeline, a very clear, chilling pattern emerges. The largest of these prior outbreaks occurred in 1374 in towns like Aachen.
1374, that date immediately jumps out, because 1374 is directly in the wake of the Black Death.
Precisely. The bubonic plague had just swept through Europe, wiping out roughly a third to half of the total population.
That's the population.
Yes. Entire villages were emptied. The social order was obliterated. The psychological trauma inflicted on the survivors of the Black Death is almost incalculable.
And it's right after that unimaginable trauma that the 1374 dancing mania erupts. People pouring into the streets, twitching, dancing in frenzies, begging priests to exorcise them.
The timing is not a coincidence.
No. If we connect the dots, we see the pattern clearly. Mass psychogenic illness arrives on the heels of catastrophe. The 1374 outbreak followed the worst pandemic in human history. The 1518 outbreak followed extreme famine and the syphilis epidemic. This psychological fracture only occurs when the collective trauma vastly exceeds the population's psychological capacity to cope.
It is a defense mechanism of last resort for a shattered society. And it is crucial to understand that this is not a primitive medieval phenomenon.
Right. It didn't end in the Middle Ages.
No, mass psychogenic illness is an inherent part of the human operating system. We have modern, extensively documented proof of this. We only need to look at the Tanganyika laughter epidemic of 1962.
I was reading up on the Tanganyika epidemic, and the parallels to Strasbourg are stunning. In 1962, in the nation that is now Tanzania, you have a boarding school for girls in a village called Kashasha. Now, it's not a famine, but it is a psychological pressure cooker.
Very much so.
The country had just won its independence. The cultural landscape was shifting violently. These girls were subjected to incredibly strict British educational expectations that clashed entirely with their traditional cultural backgrounds. They were isolated, highly stressed, and deeply anxious about their futures.
The perfect environment for a psychogenic outbreak.
Exactly. And it starts with just 3 girls. They start laughing. But it isn't a joke. It's not mirth. It is a symptom of intense, overwhelming anxiety.
A physical manifestation of stress.
Yes, they can't stop laughing. The laughter turns to crying, screaming, and extreme physical agitation. And just like Frau Trofea stepping into the street, the contagion spreads by sight. It spreads to their classmates. Dozens of girls fall into this uncontrollable laughing and crying fit that lasts for hours, sometimes days.
The mechanism of spread is identical. It is observation of a shared cultural script of distress.
And the school administration panics. They don't build wooden stages, thankfully, but they do close the school. They send the girls back to their home villages. And in doing so, they inadvertently weaponize the contagion.
They spread it.
They totally spread it. The girls take the psychogenic illness home. It spreads to the parents. It spreads to the neighboring villages. It jumps to other schools. Ultimately, the records show that around 1,000 people across 14 different schools were affected by these uncontrollable bouts of laughing and crying.
1,000 people.
Yeah, and the epidemic lasted for roughly 18 months. Modern doctors rushed in, tested the water supply, tested the food, tested for viruses. They found absolutely nothing. No environmental toxin, no biological pathogen.
Because the pathogen was psychological. And we continue to see echoes of this fundamental human software bug today. We see outbreaks of mass fainting in tight-knit factory environments in Southeast Asia. We see mysterious respiratory symptoms or sudden, unexplained physical tics spreading through middle school.
Oh, like the TikTok tics?
Exactly. Recently, there have been studies on the explosion of functional tech-like behaviors spreading globally among teenagers via social media platforms.
Which proves the point that whenever a community is put under immense psychological pressure, The mind looks for an escape route. It demands a physical manifestation of the stress, and it will always reach for whatever cultural script is available to express that distress.
It will use the vocabulary it knows.
It is a terrifying symmetry. You have 1,000 modern school children laughing uncontrollably in 1962, and 400 medieval peasants dancing uncontrollably in 1518. The specific symptom changes based on the era: laughter, fainting, decks, dancing, but the underlying biological hardware remains exactly the same.
It forces us to entirely reevaluate our understanding of resilience, vulnerability, and the mind-body connection. The mind, when pushed to the absolute brink by fear and despair, will create its own reality to process the trauma, even if that fabricated reality physically destroys the body in the process.
So what does this all mean? Let me synthesize this for you. When we cracked open this 500-year-old mystery, we instinctively looked for a historical antagonist. We looked for a toxic mold on the rye. We looked for a biological pathogen. We looked for a literal curse from an angry saint.
We wanted a tangible enemy.
We did, but there was no germ. There was no poison. The most haunting, chilling thing about the dancing plague of 1518 is that the culprit was simply frightened human beings. The monster in the street was us. It was the crushing weight of our own unexpressed terror.
And that leads me to a final lingering thought for you to consider as we close this investigation. We've established that extreme societal stress, when combined with a preloaded cultural script, can physically hijack human bodies on a mass scale. In 1518, that script was St. Vitus, and the contagion was limited to the speed of sight within the walls of a single city.
Right.
Today, you and I are exposed to infinitely more instantaneous global anxieties. We absorb collective trauma in real time through our screens. We are exposed to thousands of shared cultural scripts every single day. It makes you wonder if the psychological breaking point for a starved 16th century city was a dancing plague, what dormant, bizarre script is currently sitting in our modern collective subconscious, just waiting for the right moment of global stress to execute.
That is an incredibly chilling psychological reflection to end on. Because the Dancers of Strasbourg aren't just a bizarre curiosity safely sealed away in history. They are a reflection of our own hard wiring. Under the right pressure, the music could start again. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We set out to investigate a mystery, and we found something much closer to home than a medieval curse. Keep questioning the scripts you are given, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.